try to apply your life to the hero's journey and see points in your life that are reflected in the hero's journey. That's a great way to start kind of building your brand story. Find out how you are the hero of your own life.
Welcome to Small Acts of Rebellion, a podcast where the unspoken narratives at the intersection of our personal and professional lives come to light. I'm your host, Heather Pridemore, your guide on this journey of discovery and defiance. Join me as we uncover the rebellious spirit that shapes our careers and lives. It's time to own your story. Are you ready?
Casey Jack Serrano is a copywriter, photographer, and marketing specialist with a history in the entertainment industry. He's been on in-house marketing teams for the past 5 years and attended Denver Ad School in 2022 to further sharpen and hone his copywriting skills. Currently, Casey is writing in-house for American Lighting Inc., an international LED lighting manufacturer based out of Denver, Colorado. Welcome to the show, Casey.
Hey, thanks, Heather. I'm glad to be here.
So, if you've been listening to the show for any amount of time, you know that I am a big fan of networking and finding great connections. And Casey and I actually got connected on LinkedIn through a group called Breaking an Egg, which you've probably heard me reference on this show before. And so I just want to further sort of emphasize the importance of finding interesting people in your network to connect with, people who maybe share your values or open up opportunities. But this is the first time Casey and I have actually had a chance to have a conversation. So I'm really excited about today.
Yeah, me too.
How has Breaking Egg been for you, Casey? Have you made some other connections?
Yeah, honestly, I have made more connections through that group on LinkedIn than like anything else. It has really helped. Well, I mean, personally, it's just helped keeping a regular flow of posting. But like, I feel like the fact that everyone is kind of in it for the same thing, everyone's trying to further their own personal brand and like make themselves online out to be the person that they want to be, that it attracts so many people who are like-minded that it's just hard not to find awesome people doing similar things as you. So yeah, it's been great.
So just for everyone listening, this is another unofficial endorsement for Breaking an Egg. If you haven't checked it out yet, you really should. Lots of great people in the group and a great opportunity to enhance your personal brand on LinkedIn. So definitely check that out.
Highly recommend.
I just heard you, Casey, on another podcast. So you were on a show called Black Ink Fiction, and you were talking about the hero's journey. And so I thought that would actually be kind of an interesting way for us to jump into your personal story. And for those who aren't familiar with the hero's journey, it's a pretty common narrative framework that outlines a set of stages that typically happen in a lot of stories. And so if you've ever watched any of the like Star Wars trilogy or, Lord of the Rings, those to me are sort of the quintessential hero's journey type stories, but it applies in a lot of things that you might read or watch or consume. And so for those who aren't familiar, there's a person or character who has a problem, and at some point in the story, they're going to meet a guide or a mentor who's going to ultimately give them a plan and then calls them to action. And that's going to help the character avoid some sort of failure. And in the end, they find some sort of success. And so that's a really simplistic summary of the hero's journey. But what I thought, Casey, would be fun is reflecting on the concept of the hero's journey with all its trials, transformations, and triumphs. Can you walk us through your own professional journey as if it was the hero's journey?
Yeah. It's I like that. It's very interesting because personally, I think that I don't know, maybe it's just because I dove into the hero's journey so many times, but I feel like you can apply the hero's journey to basically any story out there. Like, that's why I feel like it works so well with brand storytelling and that kind of stuff. But within my own life, I feel like and that's the thing about the hero's journey is it's cyclical. It's always a cycle. It's all, if you meet one mentor here, maybe your journey will take you forward and you'll meet another mentor here. So I think personally in my life, I have kind of gone through phases of like my own personal journey, meeting different mentors, meeting a different mentor. And so it starts off in California and I grew up in Colorado. I moved out to California to go to college, pursued audio engineering and music. And that was kind of my like, yes, I'm going to be a rock star. I'm going to be an awesome audio engineer. I'm going to be, mixing albums for all these amazing people. And so that was kind of the start of my own like hero's journey. And met some really great people, teachers along the way that like kind of helped form me in that. But I feel like the tension really came in and the conflict of like this call to adventure when it was kind of like in the hero's journey, you had your call to adventure. And then oftentimes you have the hero's reluctance to answer that call. That was interesting because my reluctance to answer the call didn't come until like much later, because I pursued music. Like I was doing live audio for musical theater. I was doing anything that I could within that world. So for me, now that I'm a copywriter, I kind of came to the point where I was like, the dream that I'm chasing after, the journey that I think that I'm on is actually not the journey that I was on. That was me laying the foundation of like my broken world. Right. And so like now I'm 36, turning 37 in a couple weeks. I am pursuing copywriting, and I feel like everything leading up to me being a copywriter has kind of been the first half of this, ultimate story of the hero's journey for me. And I think it was tough for me to kind of come to that, because I was so into like, I want to do music. I want to do all this stuff. And then coming at it from, I'm in the real world now and I'm not making any money. What the heck? Like, this is supposed to be something that like I could make a living off of. And then I realized like, you've been a writer your whole life. You've written songs, you've written poetry, you've written short stories. Writing has always been something that's been inside you. And then as I met one of my mentors, Nick Kofal, who was Summit Integrated Systems, was one of the places that I worked that I like really realized I loved copywriting specifically. And he kind of helped shape that by giving me tools to help, point them in the right direction. And then another mentor came along, Max, who was at Summit as well, and kind of really helped me grow this idea of what like story branding really is. And so I've had, several mentors along the way take me from this, wild dream of becoming a rock star to, hey, maybe you should take all the skills that you've learned and all the skills that you've taken from those and direct them into a very specific thing that you're really good at. So yeah, I guess that's kind of a roundabout way of talking about the hero's journey in my own personal life. There's been mentors, there's been downfalls, there's been all of the typical things that you would see in a hero's journey. And they've all kind of led me to this place where I'm now like feeling like I'm pursuing the adventure that I always was meant to pursue.
Casey, there is, we actually just had a conversation on the show recently with someone who also had been working in their, let's just say, their passion, and realized, hey, this isn't very pragmatic. Like I'm suffering a lot to work in my passion, and now I need to find a way to do something that actually is more lucrative. And similar to your story, they found that they had this history of writing. And so the writing became this avenue for them to have a more sort of pragmatic solution to their situation. And what's interesting to me, though, is sometimes people think about writing also as an art form, right? And so when you think about artists and musicians and writers, they often kind of get clumped together into this place where it's like, you can't make any money doing that. So can you talk a little bit more about your professional writing and how that's become a more lucrative path, and maybe give some insights into not only like what led you there before you realized it was a way to make money, but then like kind of how you've thought about it since you started making money as a writer?
I think for me, it kind of started clicking when, as I was the marketing manager for this company, Summit Integrated Systems, I was doing, because it was a pretty small company as far as like team wise. We had our creative team was like 3 people, a creative director, me as like the copywriter, kind of acting kind of like a producer in some roles, and then we had our director / video guy, and that was like our 3-person creative team. And so I feel like I just started doing a lot of writing because it needed to be done. We needed website pages written. We needed social media posts written. We needed emails written. We needed internal marketing stuff written. We needed all sorts of stuff written. And I just found this like, well, I guess refound, because I'm like, I've always been into writing, and now it's happening. Now I'm just writing a lot for this company, and I'm getting to be creative, and I'm getting to pour into this outlet that I've always had. I've always had a very creative drive that needs to go somewhere, whether that's music or photography or being in the Squeakquel. I've always had this like artistic like drive to do something creative. And so when I found out that like, hey, one, I'm already doing a bunch of writing for this company and they're paying me to do it. I'm also being paid to do a whole bunch of other stuff that I don't really like to do. I don't really like scheduling social media posts. I don't really like going through and doing website maintenance. But it was one of those things that it was like, but I really, really like writing copy. So for me, it was like, okay, so I'm already making money doing this, but how do I just do the writing part? How do I just pour into the creative concept building of storytelling within a brand? And my wife's best friend, who was working as an art director at Deutsch New York, I think is where she was. She was like, hey, why don't you just try copywriting? You should probably go to ad school, get a portfolio together. That's probably your best way to do it. And I was like, oh, I didn't even know that was a thing. So yeah, maybe I should try doing that. And so up until that point, I didn't even realize that like copywriting was a thing. I was just writing. And it was fun being creative that way. And so that's when it kind of opened my eyes to be like, hey, you just need to pour into this skill a little bit, show the world that you're able to actually do what you're saying that you can do, and then just put yourself out there. And so that's basically what I did. I took my savings, I put it into Denver ad school and built a portfolio, and now I'm chasing down my dream copywriting job. And that's another thing, is that it's steps. Like right now at the place that I'm at, great environment. It's the people I work with are awesome. The team's great. I feel like I'm doing a little bit more technical writing than I would like to be doing more creative writing, but it's all part of the journey. It's all picking up skills along the way and learning how to apply them moving forward.
Yeah, you're just calling out something I was thinking about as you were talking, Casey, because there were a couple themes that I kind of honed in on. And one of them was sort of this like jack of all trades, right? Like learning how to do a lot of different things. And my own background is kind of similar, as have been some of the other guests on this show, where there's a period in the career development where you're just kind of picking up a lot of skills, and they might seem unrelated at times, but in hindsight, they're often very related, right? Nothing is typically wasted, and it's all kind of lending itself to some overarching thing that you can't quite see yet. And so I think that was one thing that stood out to me. The other thing that I hear you saying is you're talking a lot about continuous learning, which I'm a huge fan of. And you're talking about it in two different ways, kind of on the job continuous learning, where you're picking up new skills, you're trying new things, you're willing to do activities that maybe don't completely align with really where you see yourself going, but you're like, hey, I'm learning something new. Then on the flip side, you're talking about the fact that you invested in yourself, you took your savings, you went back to school, and you got your portfolio and kind of took that step to self-advocate and get yourself on the path that you really wanted to be on. And I think that's just really so important in so many of our stories.
Yeah, absolutely. I think investing in yourself is a huge, huge thing that more people need to do, and more people need to understand that it can be done in many different ways. It doesn't have to just be like, oh, I need to go back to school and get this degree, or I need to go to ad school and get this portfolio. It could just be like, man, there's an awesome writing conference that's happening. I should just buy tickets and go and learn from these people. And so that's I think is a big part of making that move from taking something passionate, taking something that you love doing, and starting to make money off of it.
Now, there's something, before we pivot to the next topic, there is something that I saw on your website, and it's just a quote that you have, but it struck me as interesting. So it says, just a goofy guy from Colorado with an overly romantic spirit who has always hated the idea of doing something boring for a living. And it was the second half of that sentence that really caught me, because, I don't think any of us set out in life to do something boring for a living, but I do think many of us kind of just accept that as our fate. And so I was wondering if there was any backstory to this concept of always hating the idea of doing something boring for a living.
Honestly, it goes back to like my first job. My very first job, I worked at this place here in Colorado, and it was like a wedding venue type place. And all I was doing was folding napkins, setting tables, putting up chairs, tearing down events, and cleaning bathrooms. And I was like, this is the most boring thing I've ever done in my life. And granted, I was 16 years old, so like anything was basically boring. But it kind of set in me this idea of like, I don't know if I'm meant to just do mundane for work. And so throughout the rest of my life, everything kind of started shaping around that. So instead of so when I went to college originally, I went for music specifically to learn, guitar and learn more about being a musician. And then I discovered audio engineering, and I'm like, I love this. This, like, the tech world of audio is just lighting me up. Love it. So when I couldn't find any gigs within like recording and audio engineering on the studio side, I turned to live sound because I was like, I've always loved musicals. I've always loved, being in front, being in a live performance setting, stage, venue, whatever. I love that energy. And so that kind of took me into this place of like, if I can't do studio audio engineering, which is super fun and interesting, and I'm going to go try live. And live sound like hit for me. Everywhere I went, people are like, your mixes are great. We love having you around. You're an awesome person. You mix, like, the cast loves you. We're going to have you back all the time. So it kind of became this thing of like, awesome, another awesome, fun job that I get to go to and like be around cool people and do a fun thing. And then it led to a point where I was like, I gotta, I have to do something else. I need to make a little more money. I need something that's a little bit more regular. So I was like, sales, started working at Guitar Center. Guitar Center has, whatever kind of reputation it has, but it was still a fun job. I was around audio gear. I was around guitars. I was around people who were into audio gear and guitars. Like it was one of those things where I was like, I feel I'm having fun, even if there's mundane parts of the job, I'm still having fun. And so that's kind of now where I'm at. I'm like kind of midlife. I'm not trying to like be a rock star or go out and do, things, find a job that has me out on the weekends every time. But I also don't want a boring job. So ad agencies, I've seen all the fun, crazy cultures that ad agencies have, and that seems really fun. Any kind of marketing team that I've been on always has kind of like a fun, non-boring spirit. So it really, honestly, it started when I was a 16-year-old kid working at a wedding reception venue, and has kind of driven me the rest of my life.
Well, and I think that drives us really close to where I was kind of hoping we'd go next. And so, you seem to have a lot of personal and professional interests. There's music. You've been involved in the movies, specifically a bass player for the Chipettes band in Alvin and the Chipmunks, the Squeakquel.
Yes. I don't know how I forgot to mention that little path in the whole career journey. So yes, I'm glad we're going to this.
You also have photography and the writing, which we have addressed. And so I'm just curious, as someone who's clearly very multi-passionate, how are you balancing this pursuit of diverse passions without spreading yourself too thin? And what strategies do you employ to ensure that each passion kind of receives the attention that it deserves while still finding ways to like move forward both personally and professionally?
I mean, prioritizing everything. Prioritizing life is difficult. Prioritizing everything in your life, especially when it comes to like, here are things that I'm doing to like professionally move my life forward, and balancing those with your real life. And so I think for me, I feel like I think it's funny because you mentioned jack of all trades. My name is Casey Jack, and it's true. I have my whole life been a jack of all trades. I've loved doing a bunch of different things. I've always been super adaptable. And so I think for me, it's about just listening to yourself and listening to what is kind of driving you at the moment. And like, because there's time, and also sometimes what's not driving you. Like there's times when I'm like, I'll get an offer to go shoot a concert and take pictures of a band, and they'll be like, hey, this Friday, do you want to come out? And I'm like, I've had this super long week. I don't really want to, I don't feel like it. But then I'm also like, I love doing it, regardless of if I know I'm in the mood. So I'll push myself. I'll just say, hey, just go do it. Just go do that. And then I'll realize as I'm doing it, as I'm editing, that like, that was actually a really good creative outlet for me. I actually kind of needed that. For other things, it's just looking at opportunities. It's just looking for the opportunities to go out and do those things. And I think the balance part is when you are, at least for me, the struggle with balance is always balancing with your personal life. And for me, I think it's always just been about like setting hard boundaries and being like, hey, this day, my wife and I haven't hung out in a while. This day is just for that. We're not going to be doing anything else. I'm not going to book any gigs. I'm not going to try to get any work done from home. I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to hang out with her. So I think setting boundaries within your personal and professional lives, I think that's definitely a good way to kind of keep yourself in check and keep yourself pushing towards, whatever avenues you're trying to push towards.
What about the inverse, Casey? So I think you and I probably have this in common, whereas, maybe I'm interested in like a handful of things kind of all at the same time, right? And it's hard sometimes when you want to go creatively deep on something, but at the same time, there's other things kind of pulling your interest. And so in those situations, how are you sort of doing the inverse? Because you just talked about sort of boundaries, but like, how are you also sort of feeding the beast, if you will?
It's kind of the same thing. It's kind of boundaries. It's like saying like, hey, this weekend, I'm pouring everything into photography. I am going to go out. I'm going to go take pictures of this. I'm going to go go on a hike and do some outdoor photography. I've got a gig booked. That's going to be my weekend. Nothing else is going to, interfere with that unless it's like, an emergency or whatever. But I think that's kind of the other part is as much as it is easy to just dive into the things that you really love, sometimes you need to prioritize them and set boundaries for those things themselves, even though that feels kind of like, well, this is supposed to be a fun thing. Why am I setting a boundary for this, creative passion? Anyone who's been in a band knows that you got to go to band practice. You got to make band practice work. You got to make sure that if you are going to, if you're going to kill it at the show this weekend, you got to make sure that you're ready. And so you have to prioritize, set boundaries, and say Thursday nights, band practice. Nothing else is Thursday nights. Not going out with friends, not hanging out at home. Thursday nights, band practice. So I think as much as you set boundaries in your own personal life, you have to also set boundaries in your creative life to make sure that you're making space for those things in your life. Because there has been times where I haven't made any space for creative things. And I just find myself in like a lazy slump where I'm just on the couch and I'm just, not doing anything creative, not, coming up with anything fun. And I think that's the other part is that you need to prioritize those things as well.
Where did you learn that, Casey? Like, where did you learn boundaries?
This honestly, like it's very interesting. And I have no problem talking about this. I am twice divorced. I am on my third marriage now. Third time's a charm. We're sticking with it. But it was in those first two marriages that I really kind of learned, one, your life when other people, I don't know, like your life is so layered. You have so many layers to your life that multiple people are a part of. And some of those layers have, higher priorities. Some of those people have higher priorities. But I was just saying yes to everything. I was just like, yeah, that sounds fun. I'll do it. Cool. Awesome. And then it would create conflict in my marriage. And then this would happen. And so it was kind of like an actual, or like a realization that I'm like, I need to set hard boundaries. I need to for myself, or else I'm going to get overwhelmed with everything. And two, I'm going to start dropping balls. I'm going to start hurting people. I'm going to start, whether that's a personal relationship, whether it's a professional relationship. So I think I just learned by trial and error of like, hey, you just have to set priorities or you're going to hurt people. And sometimes it's yourself. Like I said, sometimes if you don't set priorities for yourself, you're just wasting away.
So that I think actually is a really interesting segue because I didn't know that you'd been married before, but you do mention on your website that you met your wife Jill on Twitter using a pickup line about your association with the Chipmunks. And when I Google you, I find a photo of you and your wife. It's like one of the top results. So when you think about our digital age and this line between our personal and our professional lives, which let's be honest, has increasingly blurred, especially with the rise of personal branding, how do you decide what personal information or stories that you want to share? And how do you ensure that that transparency enhances your ultimate, like the image that you're putting out into the world?
So first of all, I just feel like we have to sidetrack and say, so if you don't know, if you haven't Googled my name, Google it now. You'll get several results for this wild story of me back in 2009 getting cast to be the bass player for the Chipettes band in Alvin, the Chipmunks, the Squeakquel, which is true. You can watch the Squeakquel today. If you stream it, that helps me with my residuals. So feel free to stream it if you want. But they cast me to be the bass player for this band. Super awesome experience, super cool being on set, and basically pretending to play guitar with chipmunks that weren't there. So that was really fun. So fast forward 10 years, I'm on Twitter, I'm scrolling through, I see this really cute girl picture of her that's, cute redhead. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm into this girl. The title of the picture said, do any celebrities want to date me? At Hosier, I'm single. So I was like, oh, she likes Hosier. Okay, that's cool. She's got a good taste in music. Maybe I'll just, whatever. I'm just going to type something. I'm just going to type a little joke. And then literally that's all it was. Like, I was just like, this is funny. I think it's funny. Maybe she'll think it's funny. And I was like, well, I'm not Hosier, but I was the bass player for Alvin and the Chipmunks, the Squeakquel. And I would treat you as good, if not better than Hosier. So up to you. My DMs are open. And here we are, almost 4 years later, married and with several huskies. And yeah, so it's been a whirlwind story in and of itself. But I think it's interesting because I feel like so many people latched onto that story. Anytime we post about it on Twitter, it goes viral. And that's why you pick it up, you see it on Google, because people found it and interviewed us. They wanted to talk to us. And so they, there's all sorts of, we were on that news channel in Chicago because of it. So like, but I think the interesting thing about it is that the reason it resonates with so many people is because it feels like so many people are unknowingly looking for that. They're looking for love in wherever they can find it. And Jill and I found it on Twitter. And so many people are like, man, I've been on dating apps. I've been on this, I've been on that. And I haven't found anything close to what you guys have. And it's just like this wholesome, fun story. And so as far as how that like kind of reflects and becomes more of my like personal brand story is, I think it just goes to show that, one, being vulnerable online is kind of a good thing. Like, you don't have to like share your whole heart story. But at the same time, I feel like the more vulnerable you are with your own story and the more willing you are to kind of share that with the world, the more relatable you become as a human, and therefore as a copywriter, as an art director, as a creative director, as a whatever you're trying to be, you become more relatable in that role. And like for that story specifically, I think for me, it also shows like, hey, I can turn some heads with a single tweet. Like I can make shit happen really easily with a few words, So like that's, I think personally for me, that's one of the things that like kind of brings that out in me. But I think just sharing parts of your story with people, even if it's in a professional setting like LinkedIn, I share parts of my personal story all the time there, because once again, I think it just makes you more human. And once you're more human, you are more relatable. You're able to empathize more with people. You're able to be empathized with. Like, I think being vulnerable just leads to good things, even though it can kind of be scary sometimes.
Have you had any experiences, Casey, where you've put something out into the world and it's backfired or negatively impacted you in some way? And I'm asking because I know that there can sometimes be a lot of fear about putting things, especially on the internet, that you can't take back. And so I'm just wondering, have you had any personal experiences where something didn't go well?
I can't think of anything in particular. I feel like there are stories or there are anecdotes. There are things that I don't know. I'm trying to think of like the best way to kind of phrase that, because I don't think personally I've never had anything that's like really backlash, against me. I mean, there was one, Jill, the reason that I saw Jill's tweet in the first place was because she's got a pretty decent following. I think she's got like 24,000 followers on Twitter. And so, she'll post things that are, just thoughts, and it'll get picked up by like, super far right Twitter, and it'll blow up, and it's not anything controversial. It's just an opinion that like a lot of people on that side of the political spectrum disagree with. But I don't think personally I have ever, like, I posted political stuff on Facebook that a lot of people didn't like, but there was never anything that like I wasn't proud to put on the internet, because I think that's what it is that if you're going to say something on the internet, if you wouldn't say that same thing in a crowd of people, like actual people, why not? Why wouldn't you say that thing in front of people? If there is something that like you really truly feel that like, oh, I'm afraid to say this, honestly, just say like, hey, I don't know how to really go about this. It's something that's been on my mind. I want to put it out there. I'm just looking for some help, some direction within this particular thing. I don't know. I feel like it's just all about how you approach it. It's all about how you say it. If you go out there talking like everyone's an idiot and you're the best person in the world and you're the smartest person in the world, and you put something out that, everyone is suddenly like, oh, you're not so much, this isn't exactly what you're trying to get at. I don't know. This is a tough question. It's a really tough question.
Let me narrow it down a little bit, Casey. I'm curious, like, how much intentionality you put into curating your personal brand in the digital space. So, you have a website, you're very active on LinkedIn. It sounds like you're active on some other social channels as well. And so when you think about your approach to being in those spaces, what level of it is intentional?
I mean, I think that's all intentional. Like there are some, like Twitter is definitely one of those places where I can be a little less intentional, where I can see something, have a funny thought about it, type it out and see if people think it's also funny. Like that's kind of the least intentional I get. But when it comes to like posting on LinkedIn and when it comes to posting on Instagram, even, like I feel like I'm very intentional in what I'm posting, how I'm posting it, what I'm saying, how I'm saying it. Like the main idea, the main core concept that I'm trying to come across, that I'm trying to get across, do I feel like it is something that people will actually like be able to take to heart, or it's something that will actually be able to affect them in some way? Because there's been plenty of times on LinkedIn where I have been, typing something out and get a paragraph or two into it, and I'm like, no one's gonna read this, no one's gonna get anything from this, and so I'll just scrap it. I think that everything I write when it comes to, or anything I put on online, is pretty intentional and in trying to just show people who I am and my authentic self, and making that, I don't know, like that's when you say curate. I think I try to curate my posts so that people see the genuine me, the genuine part of me that I'm trying to like show people. I want that to be shown. So I'm very, very particular about like, is this post saying what I wanted to say? Even if it's something that's pretty personal and pretty like in depth to me, I still am thinking, if I was someone else reading this, what would I take from it? If I was someone else that I had no idea who this person was, randomly came across my LinkedIn page, how would some random person see that, take it, and maybe be able to apply it to their own life?
I hear a couple of things in there, Casey. So you talked about bringing value to the person who's maybe reading or engaging with your content. You talked about your own authenticity, so showing up in a way that's vulnerable and like true to who you are, and making sure that message is articulating what you want. My question is, are there any themes that you're posting about? So, in my own activity, I like to talk about things like self-advocacy, continuous learning, things that kind of impact women in the workplace, things that relate back to being a first-generation white-collar professional who maybe came from like a blue-collar background. And so those are just some of the areas when I think about themes that I purposely stick to, because they align with my own story, but they also align with my values and the impact that I'm trying to have on the world. And so I'm just curious, like, do you have any themes within your content?
Yeah, one thing that I really have like started to kind of keep circling back on is this idea of the hero's journey in brand storytelling, and so to kind of bring it all the way back to the hero's journey. For me, one of the things that I love talking about is, when it comes to brand storytelling, there are four main elements to apply to any brand, that you can really kind of start applying these elements right away and kind of start creating better posts right away. And that would be, from the hero's journey, you have the hero, the mentor, the broken world, and then finally the magical item that kind of brings it all together. So like, in Star Wars, you've got Luke as the hero, you've got Obi-Wan and Yoda, kind of those are the mentor characters. You've got the broken world, which is this world that's, being run by this evil empire. And then you have the force and the lightsaber, right? Those are like the magic items. Those four things are what kind of push the story forward. And so with brands, the hero is always the customer. That's, I think, the biggest thing, is a lot of brands position themselves as the hero of the story, and they talk about themselves as the hero, and they kind of leave out who the actual hero is. So the customers are always the hero. The brand is the mentor. In every situation, you as a brand are coming at the people that you're talking to as their mentor. You're not saving the world. You're not the main character. You're just helping the main character. The broken world is whatever your product is solving, whether it's a physical product, whether it's a streaming product, whether it's a subscription service. What's the problem that your product is going to be solving? And then lastly, the product is the magical item that is going to help the hero save the world. And so taking those four elements and bring them into brand storytelling, I think is that's something that I talk about all the time. That's something that I'm starting to talk about more because I feel like it's really relevant. And I don't think a lot of people understand how easy of a concept it is to start applying to their own, brand story. I guess really brand storytelling is one of the things that I really like to talk about. Other than that, I think the other theme that I kind of push is I honestly do. I think it's kind of authenticity within your own personal brand. And I don't think I really talk about that, and maybe I will. Maybe I will start posting more about why being vulnerable and being more authentic with yourself online is important to your own personal brand. But that's probably one of the other things that I like to talk about a lot is being vulnerable with your personal brand online.
I mean, that's an interesting segue because one of the things I was hoping we might be able to talk about, and I think you're uniquely positioned to advise and maybe provide some perspective, is for a lot of folks who are thinking about their own personal brand. So, I mean, you kind of have an interesting set of skills coming from the marketing world and then already sort of having this very public persona and a kind of a well-curated approach to how you're presenting yourself in the world. And so I'm just wondering what your thoughts or perspective is for people who are like, I need to figure out my personal brand. I need to figure out what to do. And this is important to me, Casey, because I was someone who kind of came late to the game on personal branding. I spent 13 years in the same industry. I had a great network within that industry, but I had spent no time building any kind of personal brand beyond the customers and coworkers and people that were sort of in my ecosystem. And then I left said industry and I was like, holy shit, I don't have anything. I'm starting from ground zero. So for people who might find themselves thinking, I got to get my shit together for my personal brand, what do you advise?
I think, first of all, your story, wherever your story is, however it's taking you, that is most important. Even if you're in a different industry, I feel like, because that's kind of me. I was in audio and the music industry for a really, really long time. And now I'm copywriting for whatever brand wants me to copyright for them, But a huge part of my personal story, a huge part of my personal branding comes from that world. I was in bands. I played, I was in tours. I toured across the country in what was it? It was something super, super small SUV with four other, 20-some-year-old guys. It was rough, but it was also one of the funnest times in my life. But that can translate into how your personal brand comes off. Because of that, I know that I can talk about the experiences that I had in that realm and how they have shaped me and how they've changed me and how they've made me become the person that I am today. So I think, one, there's no part of your story that can't become part of your personal brand. Two, I think it's also what are the most interesting parts about yourself? What are the most interesting parts that you think of yourself? Because everyone thinks something of themselves. Everyone thinks that they are, fun in some ways and interesting in some ways. And I think that's the other part. You just got to find out what those things are and talk about how they have shaped your life. Talk about how they shape your life. And that's both personally and professionally, how those interests, activities, hobbies, other jobs, how all of those things have kind of pushed you to the person that you are today. So personal branding to me isn't just I'm in this spot now and I need to let people know who I am. It's kind of telling who you are as a human being, how you got to this place, and why that's important to the world. Especially if you're on LinkedIn, if you're looking to get hired, if you're looking to find a new job or join a different industry, how all of these things add up to make you a rock star in whatever field this is. So I think that's how I've approached it.
I know we don't call it imposter syndrome anymore. It has some new name, but I do think there's a lot of people who don't think that they have anything interesting, or maybe don't realize the aspects of their story that are really interesting. And so for those listening who maybe are in that group of people, I would just encourage you to talk to your friends, your family, your coworkers, because you might be surprised what people find interesting about you. I actually just had a conversation yesterday with someone who was like, I don't have anything to offer. And I was like, actually, you have a lot of really interesting stories to offer. And so it was, my perspective of what was interesting about them was sort of different than their own perspective of their story. And so I think it's important for those who maybe feel less confident about their stories and about their personal brands, don't be afraid to solicit those around you for information, but then also spend some time reflecting. You might be surprised. In my own story, I realized not only do I believe in self-advocacy because I've seen it work in the corporate spaces and it worked with my employees and it worked for my own career development, but I also realized it was part of my backstory. So when I thought about even myself in high school or maybe even before that, there were these core memories, these moments that shaped who I became in a professional environment. And the core or the common theme was self-advocacy. And so that's one reason that's important to me, is because I know it works. I've experienced it and it's part of who I am. But sometimes it takes some reflection to figure out what those things are. And so I just wanted to add a little bit to what you were saying there, Casey.
I love that. Honestly, that's and I think that really does a great job of summing that whole idea up, is that you might think that your life has been mundane or it doesn't have very many stories, or you I don't know, I've just lived my life. I haven't really been keeping track of the stories, the fun things that happen. But the more you reflect on yourself and the more you get input from other people who, you're not seeing their perspective, the more you can kind of find those interesting tidbits about yourself that help you kind of build that personal brand. So I think, yeah, you're spot on. I think reflecting, which for me personally, I've reflected that going through the years, all of the things that employers and when I'm in interviews, and one of the things that I really kind of noticed is that all those stories of, me meeting Jill online and going on tour and being in Squeakquel and all these things, those kind of keep coming up because they are interesting to people. And so I think, and granted, listen, being a bass player for the Chipettes is a 1 in a million kind of anecdote that you can tell about yourself. But also there are 1 in a million anecdotes about other people. You might have, I don't know, you might have seen a one-legged dog do a backflip. I don't know, who knows the things that you have seen or experienced that are interesting, them. And so the more you reflect, the more you think about your own personal story, not even from the perspective of your own personal brand, just your life story, that can add so much.
Casey, this has so far been a great conversation, but we are approaching the end of the show. And I like to wrap up by saying, or asking, I guess, if someone was like, I didn't listen, this was too long, didn't listen, what is the one thing that you'd want them to take away from this conversation?
Try to apply your life to the hero's journey. Try to apply your entire life. Google the hero's journey, find a map, find the circle that shows what it is, and see points in your life that are reflected in the hero's journey. And I think that is a really great way of kind of making the foundation of your brand story, is to look at yourself, look at your own story, look at your life, see how you can apply it to the hero's journey, and basically just write about how those two correlate. That's a great way to start kind of building your brand story. Find out how you are the hero of your own life, and who are your mentors, and what's your broken world, and what are the tools that you've used along the way to fix your broken world. And I think that's a really great summary of everything that we talked about so far.
I love that, Casey. Part of our message here at Small Acts of Rebellion is it's time to own your story. Are you ready? And so you ending on the hero's journey and how you are the hero of your own story, I think is a really great place to end this episode. So thank you so much for being a guest. This was such a great conversation.
Thank you so much. This is awesome. I love doing things like this, and this is a really great combo. So thanks for having me on.
If you enjoyed this episode and are seeking to redefine success on your own terms, subscribe to Small Acts of Rebellion and join a community that celebrates authenticity and personal growth.